Hey everybody, I want to resurrect my book talk with Jordan and Stefan segment at some point. But as you can imagine, those things are difficult to coordinate, and there's a lot of planning that goes into those things. Usually, we pick a book based on specific areas of interest, specific topics, specific things we want to, larger aspects of fiction we want to discuss, and that kind of thing. And I wanted to try introducing a segment where I just review whatever book I happen to have finished reading most recently. And in this case, I just finished reading An Equal Music by Vikram Seth. And this was a book that really captured my interest when I first saw it on the shelf. I make regular habit of perusing bookstores, obviously, and I noticed this one, and it caught my eye. The musical element was interesting to me, being a musician, and about it being very much set in the lives of musicians, professional musicians. I thought it would be something I could relate to. And it turns out one of the things that the book was lauded for was its very, very thorough and informed description of music, of music theory concepts, of the lives of musicians and the lives, especially professional classical musicians and that sort of thing. And having interacted with that world extensively, I can say that the descriptions of what it's like to be a professional musician, especially a professional classical musician, and the trials and tribulations involved in that are spot on. Like so many of the things that he describes these characters going through are things that I have either encountered myself or I have seen other people encounter in the professional music world and that sort of thing. Even all the way down to, the book revolves in large part around the goings on of a classical string quartet. And there's one scene where the members are arguing because they have three songs to play in three different key signatures, and right now for the show the order of sharps goes 3 sharps, 1 sharp, 2 sharps, and the one person is saying that it should go 1 sharp, 2 sharps, 3 sharps, because that will better ease the audience into the transition of keys. Meanwhile, would any of this ever actually make any difference to the audience? No, of course not. So ridiculous discussions like that do happen in the music world. And little things like that, I will say, really drew me into the authenticity of the story, and you really got a good sense of these characters really inhabiting this world, this classical music world. That said, I don't recommend the book. And the reason for it is that, well, here I am getting ahead of why I don't recommend it before I'm even telling you what it's about. So, An Equal Music is about a character named Michael who performs with the Maggiore, I'm saying that right, Maggiore Quartet. And he is a professional violinist, very highly successful, highly regarded, living in London, and basically living his best life as a successful classical musician when he reconnects with his former college sweetheart, Julia, who was a pianist. And I'm going to try to keep this relatively spoiler-free, but there are going to be some details I need to discuss. One modest spoiler, this is discovered in the first, the opening chapters of the book. But one thing that we discover when Julia and Michael reconnect, she is now married and they have a child. But another more pressing matter is that she has a medical issue that's causing her to lose her hearing. She's going deaf. And so you have this woman who is a stunning classical virtuoso that is, again, highly regarded and highly successful, that is losing her capacity to play with an ensemble due to her loss of hearing. And so, despite the fact that she is now married with a child, she and Julia and Michael resume their relationship, now in the context, obviously, of an extramarital affair. So, obviously this has doomed romance written all over it. And the book is very much advertised as being a doomed romance. Obviously, the quote from Michael Dirda of the Washington Post talks about crying at the end of the novel. So we are set up from the beginning knowing that this will be a doomed romance, even from the promotional aspect. The thing is, the reason I'm not recommending it is because it fails on two levels. First is I never felt like these two characters were actually enjoying this relationship. Obviously, if they're having an affair, it's going to be very tense. They have to keep things quiet. But even when they're alone together, I never got the impression that they were enjoying being with one another. It's indeed their best moments. Their best moments are really just very somber. It feels they're either arguing, or it's just very. It feels almost like a funeral, on and on. And so I really never felt like I was getting into something that had any kind of real leverage. It was like these two characters showed up and said, "Hi, we're here to have a doomed relationship," and it proceeded to be exactly that. Again, I'm not trying to spoil it per se, but the fact that it's so heavily marketed and presented as being an inevitably doomed relationship makes it kind of obvious that that's what's going to, that's where this is going. So that's not really a spoiler. And the character Michael, the main character, is very much a Holden Caulfield type, and that is not a type that you want to see embodied in the behavior and the behavior, actions, and narrative of a man in his 30s. So that was one reason that I can't recommend it. The other reason I can't recommend it is because a doomed relationship really is in literature, in fiction of any kind, is supposed to be really a forum to tell us something about relationships, something that we never would have been able to get out of a successful, happily ever after positive relationship, or at least a relationship that ends on a positive note or ends with marriage or something like that. So the whole time I was trying to think, what is this author trying to say in the context of this doomed relationship? Usually it's pretty easy to summarize. You know, Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, one of the ultimate doomed romances of from the literary canon. It's very obvious. It's saying that if you let your limerent emotions run wild, you will end up ruining everything for yourself and everybody else. A more modern example, one of my favorite rom-coms, really my favorite rom-com, and one of my all-time favorite movies, Chasing Amy. That, you know, if you let your personal hang-ups and inhibitions consume you, you won't be able to properly love this person that is devoting themselves to you. So there's always these examples of doomed romances that have great messages associated with them. And so, you know, the three that everybody loves to talk about are from the movie world are Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 500 Days of Summer, and Her, the Joaquin Phoenix film. And just like in 500 Days of Summer, for example, the message of the doomed relationship is it's basically the same thing as Romeo and Juliet, which is if you let your limerent feelings run wild, you end up screwing things up for yourself and everybody else. But really what it is saying, the message of that one is saying that you cannot, you are setting yourself up for failure in relationships if you begin with a perfect template, a template of what a perfect person should be, and start trying to mold real people into that template. So that was what I was waiting for throughout this book. What are we supposed to get out of this? It and Here at this point, I will say I'm going to officially draw a line in the sand that here I will be talking about spoiler things from the latter third of the book. So if you're still on the fence, or you might read it, you might want to stop at this point. But anyway, when Julia and Michael inevitably part ways, they part ways for a long period, an extended period of time. And finally, they don't have a reconciliation of any kind, really. She basically tells him, just look, stay away, go away, I'm going back to my husband, stay away, stay far away. And the book ends with him buying a ticket to and going to see Julia perform solo piano. And she makes an ill-fated attempt to perform with his quartet, and then so she can no longer give ensemble performances because she's deaf, but because obviously it's only her and her own performance, she can still give solo piano performances. So he buys a ticket to see her do a solo piano performance, and he's watching from a distance while she's by herself, fully isolated from himself and everybody else, playing music that she can't actually hear. And I got the impression that what we're trying to say with this is that Julia is now fully isolated, that this the hearing deficiency has fully alienated her from the world, and she's now completely isolated, and he is having to watch from this very bittersweet standpoint, or that he's just an obsessive creep at this point who can't let go. Either way, it doesn't really work, because this whole book up to this point has been a process of hopefully Michael learning something. Everything has been told from his perspective. It's in the first person. Everything is from his perspective. It's all about his constant train of thought, his constant ideas, his constant ruminations. And so we are constantly waiting for him to learn something about love, or come to a personal revelation that will allow him to move forward, and he never really does. Instead, we're left with something that would be a haunting and poignant way to end the story if it had been Julia's story, but it's primarily Michael's story. So that really did not work for me. From a narrative standpoint, from a writing standpoint, Vikram Seth writes beautifully. He writes beautiful passages. The problem is they're beautiful passages that come at the risk, and I shouldn't say just the risk, at the absolute detriment of the flow of his narrative. The Michael character gets so lost in thought that just the flow of the reading almost grinds to a halt. And the beats at which he gets lost in thought don't come very naturally. They seem to just constantly be interrupting action, interrupting dialogue, important dialogue between two characters, that kind of thing. So it starts to feel like, because you do have an author that can write beautiful passages, it starts to feel more like an exercise in virtuosity. And that starts to seem pompous. It starts to sound like this was an author who was trying to just impress us at every turn with what an eloquent writer he is, and really that sort of thing needs to land where it's the most tasteful and the most effective, rather than constantly inundating us with, yes, you can write incredible passages, we get that, we know it, now move the story forward and use those gifts that you have where they're the most effective. The last thing I will say about this book is it tries too hard to be a slice of life kind of thing. When we read this narrative, we get into it, we're drawn into it because of the gut-wrenching agony that Michael is feeling at this, Julia being the one that got away and now having this one tiny sliver of an opportunity to reclaim her, to have her again. That's what we're really motivated by. And if he took out, the book could literally be about a third as long as it is, if he had taken out so much of the slice of life stuff, and so much of the padding is in the back of the book, in the third act, where he really should not be concerned with, he should not be at all concerned with the nature of with conveying the nature of the classical music atmosphere. That needs to all happen in the first third of the book, somewhat in the second third of the book when they go on tour, that kind of thing, to show us what that life is like, the life on the road is like and everything. But all of that stuff, all of that deeply informed knowledge that he attained about how the classical music world works, that needs to be window dressing at the beginning in the first act to draw us into the story and draw us into the atmosphere of the story. And it certainly is there in the first act. The problem is that you have all of these slice of life things that keep happening in the last third of the book, when we should be barreling towards the conclusion, when we should have a sense of downward motion, rolling downhill towards, from the climax to the resolution. We are still getting held up by all of this slice of life, all these slice of life experiences. So, for example, there is a scene, there's a chapter where one of the guys from the classical quartet, the Magyar quartet, Piers, the character of Piers, goes to an auction to bid on this beautiful violin, and he's it's going to basically cost as much or more than a new car, and so he's financed the thing and worked out all the financing and all of that stuff, and he goes, and we find out within the space of this one chapter about all of this stuff, and that this is the violin Piers has got to have, and he goes to the auction and fails to get it, and is torn up and sad and brokenhearted about it and everything, and goes on with it. At this point in the back half of the book, when we are starting to, we've had the climactic downfall of the Michael and Julia relationship, and we are now thinking, what will the resolution of their relationship ultimately be? How is he going to close out the story? We are hearing these things that really don't add anything to that actual story arc. It's more of just, oh, come over here and look at how informed I am about my world building. And world building, again, should be in the first half or the first third of the book, so that we can set up a good story and have it flow through that world towards the climax. Similarly, there is a subplot in the last third about Michael he's borrowing his violin is on loan from a private holder. This is actually a fairly common practice in the classical music world, especially classical musicians, especially luminaries in a specific field, people who have a specific prominence within the classical music world, often will be loaned instruments that they often will be loaned instruments that they would not otherwise be able to afford, that would be out of their reach, because the private owners, the private collection that has that instrument, maybe it's a Stradivarius or something like that, wants the instrument to be played. It needs to be played, or it loses its luster, it loses its quality and everything. So it's common that they will loan out high-quality, legendary instruments like this, and that's what he's dealing with this violin that he plays. Now, he decides towards the end of the story that he wants to get his own violin. Again, this whole arc is unnecessary to the story. I mean, as I start to see this arc being introduced into the story of him trying to get his own violin rather than keeping one that's on loan, I thought, well, okay, maybe they're going somewhere with this. They're going to tie it back into the story. Like, this is symbolic that he's moving on from the relationship with Julia. He's going to try to take more. He's going to take more control of his life, or maybe that's what this represents, or something like that. And I never really got that feeling. It just seemed like unnecessary padding to show you the kind of difficulties and aggravations that a classical musician would go through trying to acquire his own instrument, trying to get financing from the bank, trying to find an interested designer and luthiers and all that sort of thing. And then again, bringing this up when we should be barreling towards the resolution just belabors the story. The ultimate resolution of that is that his childhood teacher, mentor, dies and gives him wills him the violin that he's been playing all along, and so he's able to own this violin that has been up in the ownership has been in someone else's hands. He's finally able to own it after all of this time. And he gets this call from the woman's parasitic nephew, who's already very well to do, but wants to get a hold of the violin to sell it to make even more money. And even though it's already been willed to him, and it sets up like, okay, this is going to be a conflict that we're going to have to deal with, and they're going to fight this out in court or something. And then, of course, he just gets a call from gets in touch with the lawyer in charge of the woman's estate, and the lawyer tells him, yeah, there's nothing to it. He hasn't got a leg to stand on, and they laugh about it and go on. Okay, so we just set up a conflict and instantly resolved it for nothing. The same thing with the other character bidding on an auctioned violin. It's like we just set up a conflict and instantly resolve it for nothing. You know, the conflict being that he starts bidding higher and higher and higher, well beyond what he can ever possibly afford, and then somebody bids super high and he can't go any higher, and so the conflict's resolved instantly. Things like that, especially again in the last third of the book, really just make for a very belabored read. So Unequal Music by Vikram Seth, beautifully written in some areas, very, very beautifully written, beautiful prose, but it seldom adds up to anything more than just an exercise in, I guess, literary misery. But like I said, well-researched world building, cannot fault him for that at all. That is certainly to be applauded, but I don't think that alone would justify reading an otherwise fairly uninteresting narrative. So anyway, take care.